In this chapter, we're going to sew the back together, and we're going to top stitch the back, and then we're also going to add the facing to the back and top stitch all of that. It's going to look great. First, we're going to put the center back on top of each other, and that will be sewn with a seam allowance of 1 centimeter. That's actually always the seam allowance, so if you're in any question about my patterns, it is 1 centimeter, and it's always included in your pattern. Hop on over to that sewing machine, lock in your stitches, and we're sewing all the way down. Try to get round the curve without actually lifting the presser foot at all. You're using your left hand to turn the fabric. There's a lot of force from the left hand on the fabric. Maybe you can't see it, but it is. You really push that round. Now we're going to serge from the top of the left pants, because the serging from the top side is always way prettier than the serger underside. That's why we're always serging from the side that's visible later on. There we go, nicely caught. And now we're ironing this into the left hand side. If you're not quite sure which way it goes, just iron it from the right hand side, if that makes it easier. That way goes towards the left, and that makes it just flatter. If you're not putting the snap placket in and you're having like the regular trouser leg, then that's especially important, because the front and the back seam then face in different directions, and that makes it flatter. Now we're going to top stitch this. The first stitching line is going to be that same 2 to 3 millimeters from the edge, and then we're going to do another stitch line which is presser foot width from the edge again. Lock in your stitches, and then pull the fabric slightly apart so that where you have your iron seam, that doesn't fold over a bit. It shouldn't do, because we have pressed it, but it does happen. Now, some of you might not have ironed it and gone straight to the sewing machine after you sewn the seam and serged it, and that's okay as well. But you do have to then be really vigilant, pull the fabric apart, and make sure with your left hand that there are no creases in that curved area at the lower end. And then we're putting the secondary stitch line next to it, foot width. We have really need for speed here. And here it's particularly important that your left hand kind of sorts the fabric out, and I spread my fingers out, you can see that there, just to make sure that I do not get any pleats there. Now we're going to give that a good press. It makes for a really good finished product, so don't skip all this ironing. Right, now we can do our facing, and that will be interfaced because I'm using a fairly lightweight cotton here, and that needs the stability. So you want to iron your interfacing to the wrong side of the fabric and then serge the lower edge. And when you are putting your interfacing on, you need to put your iron down, not move it around and push it, but you lift it up and put it down, lift it up and put it down. And then what you want to do is maybe count to 8, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, however you want to do that. And you should not be able to move that interfacing off the fabric anymore, and then it's perfect. You know, this is like a bit arduous. You're just counting till 8, move your iron across, and that's basically it. And if you need to, you can make yourself a coffee at this stage and press it from the other side as well, and then pop on over to your serger and just serge the lower edge. You could also just zigzag that and turn it up, if you like, that's also good if you don't have a serger. But of course, for these type of things, having a serger is a real advantage. And now I'm going to pin the armhole and the neckline. And when we're sewing this together, you can leave the upper edge of the straps open. You do not need to close them necessarily. It's a matter of taste. Some people prefer it when it's all clean up there. I think you can cut it back and make life easier for yourself, but also make it flatter, which is quite important when we are finishing and we're putting all this through the slider and we're sewing across it. We don't want it to be super thick. We'll just leave it as it is. If you wanted to, you could serge that as well. I saw some manufacturers had serged that edge, some others, Levi's, I think, had just left it how it was. So however you feel you want to do this, if you want to put your label in, then maybe you want to do that before you pin your facing on, of course, because it goes on the facing. I put mine on later through all the layers. And so now we go over to the sewing machine. Try to not lift the presser foot when you go around these curves. They're not so pronounced here in the armhole area. You should be able to do that. And it's very good practice, and your stitching line will look much smoother and rounder if you manage this technique. Now at the top here, make sure you don't go straight up, but you follow that line. We do want the top to be slightly slimmer, because we are turning over that edge and it will always stick out the sides if that's not slimmer. So make sure you follow that line. And then as we come around here, it gets harder to just move your foot around and the fabric around without lifting the presser foot. So here you may want to lift the presser foot, have the needle down. And then what you want to do also is to reduce the stitch length in this area to 1.5, so that when we do the snipping right to the seam line, nothing can fray out, nothing can rip out. There you go. I'm almost over it, and then I can lengthen my stitch length again, and I'm doing 2.5 for this, and I'll go up on the other side. The one thing that I forgot to do very often was to change the tension of the sewing machine and to change even the top stitching thread to the regular thread. So in this case here, we're stitching, of course, with regular thread, and the stitch tension has to go back down to regular stitch tension. And coming down the other side. Now try to do that round part again in one go. Your left hand moves the fabric around and your right hand pushes it from the other side under the foot, so it's fed in straight as you reach that presser foot. Now we're going to cut back. I cut back quite sharpish. I think about 3 millimeters is okay. You don't need to leave a lot standing, and what you really don't want to do is leave any of the seam allowance standing and then cut out these horrendous triangles like they show you in Butterick and Simplicity patterns. That never looks good. It's better to cut it back pretty sharpish, and then do not cut into the curves unless they're very pronounced. So in our case, that is the case here at the dip where the neckline is. That is too sharp. That will have to be snipped, but anywhere else, don't do that. Just generally, if you're making, for example, a bodice as well for a girl's dress, never snip that. Just cut it back and you'll be okay. Look, I need to cut back a little bit more here. If you don't cut back enough, then this method will create too much tension. So you just have to hit that sweet spot that holds the shape of the garment and at the same time makes it look really smooth. So here I'm snipping to the quick. You can cut that back a little bit, also snip your seam allowance of the center back. Always cut away as much as possible so that you have a very flat result. Now I'm going to take a safety pin and attach it to the top of these straps. Just push it through and then we pull it through. If you have closed the top edge because you prefer that method, that's fine. And then we just push it through to the other side. Start pulling it from the other side. It's very simple to do this. Grab it from the other side and pull it through. And I do the same on the other side. So now we're going to iron out the edges. So you roll the edges between your fingers until it sits right on the edge. Yeah, the seam needs to come right to the edge. And if you don't do this right and it stays in too far, then it's such a fiddly job to get that out. So do roll it, keep rolling until it really is in the edge, and then iron the whole lot. Now, if you are watching this via my YouTube channel, I would really like to hear from you. Are you enjoying this? Have you made them or will you make them? I think that would be really cool. And if you are watching this via the sewing school, you can still click on this link which says watch on YouTube and leave a comment for me. I'll be happy to read them all and answer any of the questions you have. And the final thing now is we are going to do the little plackets for the back. We're going to close them just across the top. The lower end is already serged. You could of course finish this part and then serge them. That would also work. It doesn't have to be done earlier. There we go, 1 centimeter seam allowance as per usual. Remove your pin, lock in your stitches, go to the end. Great. Do the same on the other side, but try to save thread by just feeding them in one after the other. Take a pin and work out the seam and then iron it. And we'll do the other one as well, of course. Turn it, lift out the seam, press that one. And now that we've done this easy back, we're on to the placket closure. Not so easy, but it's such a great method. And once you've got it down, it's going to be no problem at all. So I see you there.